Hello, everyone. Hello, and welcome to the Radical Edge of HR, powered by HR Knowledge Source. I am your host, Tanya Hawley, and of course, I'm so excited and very happy to be with you once again. Thank you for sharing your afternoon and part of your day with us. And of course, we discuss those radical topics right here on the Radical Edge of HR. And today's topic is affirmative action today. And of course, we always bring you the experts. And again, we have them today. So I'm going to start with the ladies first. Today, our first expert is none other than Miss Alma Hooks, who is the DICE practice lead and also a senior consultant with HR Knowledge Source. Hello, Alma.
Hey Tanya, how are
I'm
you?
doing great. Welcome back.
Thank you. Love being here with you.
It's always a pleasure. And we're going to learn a little bit more about Alma in just a minute. And not to insult Alma, but I saved the best for last. Our second,
None taken.
our,
He's the best.
our second very special guest today is none other than Mr. Steve Pascal from Eli, and also an attorney. So let's get Steve in here. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you, Tanya. Alma, good to see you again. I'm honored to be here with both of you.
I
Likewise.
thank you. Thank you so much for gracing us with your presence and your expertise. Now, before we dive in, I would like you all to kind of introduce yourselves. If you could just tell our audience a little bit about yourselves, because I know you're subject matter experts, but they may not know. So, Alma, again, I'm going to start with ladies first. If you could just kind of give a little something about yourself, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a 15-year HR professional, been in HR leadership for that long, cannot believe it. But my love of DEI and inclusion started with getting my MBA focused in global management. So really understanding the cross communications and how that plays a role globally when leading an organization. I am a DICE practitioner and I recently became an EEOC federal investigator. So really understanding the law as well as the
Mhm.
behaviors that can help create an inclusive workforce.
Thank you
So,
so much.
tossing it to you, Steve.
Before we toss, before we toss, Steve, they may not know what dice means. Could you tell everybody
Oh,
what dice
thank
means?
you. Thank you, Tanya. So, diversity, inclusion, culture, and equity.
Thank you so much. And now we're going to toss it over to Steve. If you could just tease everybody and tell them a little something about yourself.
I began my career as an investigator with the EEOC,
Mm,
later as a trial attorney, spent a total about 2.5 years at the commission. I joined a law firm in Atlanta where I defended employers, where I advised them, and also started training them on how to do things the right way. I made partner a long time ago, left in 1986, and since then have been working with organizations, public, private, all over the country and some internationally, to help them build civil, inclusive, diverse, fair workplaces where they activate their values to build inclusive, fair, high performing cultures.
wonderful. Thank you so much, Steve. And as you all can see and hear, because some of us will be listening to this podcast, we've got the experts in the house. Now, of course, I mentioned the title today is Affirmative Action Today. And I'm going to hand the mic, the reins, and everything else over to the expertise, to Alma and Steve, and I'm going to let you all have at it. So I'm going to disappear. I'll be watching in the background, and I'll come back a little later toward the end to wrap things up. But I'm going to hand it over to your capable hands and let you all go for it. See you soon.
Thank you, Tanya. And I see Artie said hi, Steve and Alma. So, hey, Artie, thank you so much for being here. And before I jump into my first question, Steve, I just want to say 86 was a good year. So, let's get started. All right, Steve. So, we have been seeing so much about affirmative action on the news, on social media, amongst conversations with colleagues and friends and family. So, let's anchor this in just explaining the affirmative action ruling in layman's terms.
The affirmative action ruling basically said that race may not be considered in the admission process of students with those organizations which receive federal assistance. It's under Title VI, of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which also had provisions prohibiting discrimination in employment. The reason for the concern is what that will do in education, and also the sense that that ruling will ultimately be challenged to affect those employers, primarily federal contractors we normally think of, who engage in affirmative action, potentially outlawing it, and also having an impact on DEI programs as well.
Oh, thank you for that, Steve. And before we go into the impact to DEI programs, I want to, go a little deeper because we both recently read the article about admissions teams now asking more substantive questions for the essays that students have to write, where they're saying, tell us about experiences that shaped who you are. And I'm assuming that that's within hopes of people feeling comfortable to talk about their race or some type of characteristics, diversity trait that contributed to them where they are today. So my question to you is, how do you feel like that is going to impact college admissions? And what that is just learning more about who a person is and what shaped who they are if they mention race.
It's a tough question, Alma. It's a very tough question. Let me talk, if I may, just a bit about what this is all about. And I have to say, I reread Justice Ketanji Jackson's opinion that talks about the history of racial discrimination, particularly with regard to African Americans. It's emotionally and logically extraordinarily compelling. I get, frankly, chills when I think about it. And anyone who really wants to get what this is about should read it. But basically what is going on now is that organizations, colleges, universities are trying to figure out how to get people from the widest array of backgrounds, taking into account a range of characteristics. Now, what the court was talking about with regard to North Carolina is it didn't explicitly consider race. It was one of many factors. They're saying that can't be done, as I understand it. So what colleges are trying to do is to figure out what differential experiences people have had that may or may not be linked to race, with the idea of getting the best candidates from the wide array of the population, which has evolved demographically and changed over the last 50 years since that law was passed.
Oh, thank you for that, Steve. And I'm happy you mentioned reading what Justice Ketanji Brown mentioned, because that does add a lot of context. So for those of you who didn't pick that up, strongly suggest everyone do that. Thank you. And we have people saying hello and loving the topic in the chat. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here. So going into my next question, I saw a statistic that said Black women are the most educated group in the US. And so I often hear people say to me, Amma, is this affirmative action thing even needed anymore? Because people are getting education. What would you say to that?
Let's talk about the workplace. How's that, Alma?
That sounds good.
It's a powerful statistic that you have. But the real question is how are those African American Black females being treated when they're entering the workplace? Are they being hired given due regard for their qualifications? Are they being integrated into the organization as full contributors, colleagues, peers, social connections? That's the question. The education is extraordinary. It's the opportunity to use it which is vital.
Oh, that was powerful. It's the opportunity to use it, which is vital. Yeah, I don't want to get on a soapbox with how many people have a lot of degrees, right? But don't necessarily translate those degrees to high-paying, meaningful jobs. So thank you so much for saying that. So speaking of the workplace, Steve, There were many articles that talked about now how DEI is in jeopardy with various organizations. We read an article that there were letters sent to Fortune 100 CEOs talking about their diversity efforts. So, what does this mean for the workplace?
Several things, and I'll be brevity. I tell everybody is the soul of wit. I'll try to be brief. Number one, it is uncertain what the Supreme Court is going to do. There are going to be cases. Those 13 attorney generals were countered by, I think, 23 or 24, who said, you better be careful about how you respond, in contrast to the way our colleagues in the 13th state talked about it. So there are going to be risks to employers in terms of how they hire. And there are also going to be operational risks in terms of the people that they hire. Organizations that I talk to want to get the broadest array of people from wherever they can find them. If you ask them, as I have hundreds of times now, do you want the best people wherever you can find them, their background, race, religion, age, national origin? They say yes. So that would say they had better be looking everywhere, and it includes the African American females and males and others, as you mentioned. Now, some may challenge it and say that's not fair that you looked at a wide array. But the point of the matter is there are going to be risks to your operation if you don't look broadly, and there are going to be risks to your operation if you do. You've got to choose those and keep them in balance. And it seems to me what you were also talking about, Ahmed, is you talked about people who, maybe I'm paraphrasing it from an earlier conversation, clawed their way up to get those degrees when other people had an easier road. Organizations are going to say, let's see what challenges people overcame. It wasn't so easy coming from this background or another. And we've got to balance those things as well. It is complex, but there's a combination of business risk and legal risk, and they have to be balanced.
Do you mind that now I'm extra curious now because you said the mixture of business risk and legal risk, and that is language that any business leader speaks, right? Take the emotion out of it, take beliefs and thoughts and biases out of it. Business risks and legal risk is a language most people speak. So tell me more about what some of that could be.
Several things, and I'll try to relate this back to DEI. Mm-hmm. So as to DEI, the demographics of the workplace are changing. They're not what they were like 50 years ago or even further. Organizations that don't look broadly, taking account of all that's changed, will narrow their pool of candidates, and that can affect the quality of the candidates that they're going to take. Ask people, do you want the best wherever you can find them? They'll say yes. That's not enough, but getting diversity in the door is a first step, but it's only a step up the staircase. Second is, to me, and I'll go out of sequence here, if you bring those people in and they're not included fully, if they're not able to work as full members of the team in terms of all the things that make teamwork and individual performance work the best, then the analogy I've used, it's like buying a great computer, not plugging it in and putting it in the corner and maybe using it once in a while. You should use it all the time. Bad business decision. You want people to feel comfortable raising ideas. Talk to NASA about that in a flight that was rescued 60 or 50 years ago by 3 African-American genius women who, if they hadn't been there would have been a catastrophe. 2 weeks ago, I talked to people at NASA. They remember that story. That's what you want to have when you have full participation, people speaking up, being used, ideas and concerns. What I didn't talk about is equity. How you define that, I think, is subject to definition and differences. That's got to be figured out. But the idea of diversity and fairness and inclusion are critical to building high-performing workplaces, broad, that are also legal, where you balance those risks that I mentioned.
Oh, thank you for saying that. And, not to make light of the situation, but I love that idea and the analogy you used of the computer, and only using it a few times or only using just a few parts of the computer is a bad business decision. So it made me think of my mom, who always wants the latest phones and everything, but literally only uses 3 aspects of this expensive phone, right? It's a bad business decision. So thank you for supporting me in my argument when I talk to her, Steve.
I have a very close family member, and I will leave it at that, who might have a lot to say in common with your mom. She's
That's
not
awesome.
watching, I know that.
Thank you for that. I'm going to say Steve said, no, I'm playing. So, I've heard conversations about saying, all right, well, if this affirmative action is happening with Ivy League schools like Harvard, forget it. We'll just go to other types of schools. So, for example, HBCUs, or we'll just go to really good state schools, or we'll go to other schools. And so I hear them, right? But when you think about that, what type of systems of inequities, because you mentioned inequities earlier, or you mentioned equity earlier, what type of inequities could that cause if people just say, forget the Ivy League, we're going to go somewhere else?
I do think that universities are aware of that. And I talked to a colleague recently who I've known a long time in admissions. And what he told me is that they don't want to lose students to HBCs or any other place who they really want to have. So they are figuring out how to deal with the Supreme Court's decision, balancing the law and balancing the operational advantages of having diverse alumni means. That's what they are doing. And honestly, some people might well decide, I am not putting up with this stuff. I'll go to a place where I'll get a great education and have a collegial work environment where I don't have to deal with this. That's something that the schools that you mentioned don't want to see happen. Now, some may say, well, we'll do certain things, but you see a lot of schools right now in that group that you're talking about saying we are reconsidering legacy admissions. Wesleyan University dropped theirs 2 weeks ago. Amherst dropped it even earlier. Those are small colleges. And you're seeing other schools saying we're going to control that, and we're going to look into donor admissions and even athletics, because athletics have a disproportionate number of Caucasians because of a variety of factors. Sports like squash are just not commonly played unless you come from certain backgrounds.
Yeah,
it's changing, but that's the way it is.
Yeah, I've never seen a squash game before. So, yeah.
I play tennis. I play squash. Now I play pickleball. I've been more too, but they're all related.
I see Nicole put something in the chat. She said, I am focused on getting in the door as step 1. We must incorporate a person fully into the workplace. And that definitely echoes what you were talking about. But any other statements that you would want to say to that?
Yes. This really should apply to everyone. And basically, it's look at it as a business issue. Why do you want to have people working with you who are not fully engaged? It's something that even in a small company, we talk about a lot. How do we do it, particularly virtually now? But you want people to be colleagues. You want them to work together. You want them to have normal conversations where ideas pop out. And it's the business's advantage to have that. And that, I think, is what organizations are coming to terms with. DE&I is not the same as a single solitary event you do once in a way and you're done. If it's approached that way, I've said you're done, but you're just not done the way you think you are. You're done a different way. This has got to be continuous. It's part of the process you mentioned.
Oh, thank you, Steve. So I think that's a perfect segue into my last question. And this is going to be a little radical, but, I got to keep it real, Steve, right? So we understand what the affirmative action ruling is. We've talked about that. We also understand how that impacts the workplace, how it could create inequities within a system. We've talked about that. But that sounds like it's primarily impacting minorities. Why should white men care about this ruling? And I'm saying white men because white men are still the power majority within the US.
Good question. Why should they care about it? First of all, DEI applies to everyone. The standards of daily treatment should be the same. There is sometimes a myth that DEI means that there's differential behavioral standards in the workplace, and you can say things to one group that you can't say to another. Not true. EEO, equal employment, DEI should be like this. Too often, they're like this. That is bad for the organization's growth and business and success. Why should I care? I have a small business. I want to have the best people, and I want to have people from different backgrounds. As the example I use, though, I think that will give me the best collegial results. So I do videos and we produce things. I'm fortunate to work with a diverse group of people from a variety of different backgrounds. And I can think of examples, one particularly, a very good friend and colleague, who saw something in a video that nobody else did. She picked up something that could have seemed racially insensitive. That was 2014. Nobody else did. She was in on the process and said, wait a second. And she was right. That's a minor, trivial, not trivial, but it's an example. Then that's very specific to what we're talking about in our work. But if she hadn't caught that, we would have released it to clients and they would have picked it up. And having people with different backgrounds who see things helps avoid that, but it also surfaces the best talent available and getting results that you might not get. But you've got to get it so that all people understand this isn't just for me or you, this is for the benefit of the enterprise that flows back to all of us.
It's a lot to unpack there. So this isn't just beneficial for you or for me. You said it's beneficial for the enterprise. And when I hear you say that, I hear that this is baked into the organization's strategy. I hear that there is a business need for diversity and inclusion. And what else I hear is like, kudos to you with your organization, because it's one thing to have that person there that sees something, but it's another thing to have that person there that sees something that feels comfortable to speak up and bring it to your attention. So yeah, yes, please, no, add to it.
Things. All of the organizations that we work with, if I can make that generalization, whether they're stated, as in many, if not most, or implicit, have values, fairness, respect. If you ask them, do you believe in those things? They do. They say they will. But sometimes they tolerate behaviors that conflict with those values. Respect means it doesn't say we will only respect you if you look like this or you're this gender. If you say, is that what we want? No. So what you really need to think of is taking those values and activating them, having a business commitment that involves everybody, not just one group, DEI, because that's got to be integrated into the operations of the business, like safety and quality. People at every level need to talk about it. Everybody's got the policies and standards, but you've got to have a range of consequences, from positive to corrective to separation, if you engage in behavior that jeopardizes your results, creates legal risk, and is contrary to your values. And this has got to be continuous. It's not, okay, we did this in 23, we're done. This is as continuous as safety, as quality, as innovation, as customer or client service, because it is a foundational element of all of that, particularly the way we are as a people. People means external, and citizens with shared mission, vision, and values, responsibilities, and an expectation of consistent behavioral treatment.
That's fantastic. And I see your wonderful face, Tanya. So that lets me know we're coming to an end. But Steve, I just want to close with one. when I hear you speak, I hear the passion behind what you're saying. I hear not only the passion, but the practical application when you said, DEI, like safety, like, quality. That is something that really resonates with people because you don't ever hear an organization say, oh, well, I'm going to hire the safety person and go do that by yourself, right? It takes a collective effort. So just thank you so much for your perspective, and allowing me to ask the somewhat hard questions and just getting right in there. Just thank you so much for being a thought partner.
My pleasure. I'm honored to be here.
It was a very enlightening conversation. We got a few chuckles. I know you heard me. I'm sorry. I forgot I was.
I think we may have frozen Tanya.
Yep, I think so. But I was just wanting to see. I know we just have a few more minutes left. Looking at
It was
the chat.
funny. So, I was listening.
Just looking at the chat to see if there are any more questions. And Tanya, you're right back with us. So
I'm back.
hey
Yes,
there.
it's actually storming or raining over here, so my apologies for that. But you all did a fantastic job. Thank you all for watching. If you're watching or listening, we appreciate your presence here. In closing, I'm going to let you all, if you could leave some final nuggets for everyone, whatever you want to leave them with, that will keep them thinking about this, because we could have talked for hours, literally, but we don't have that much time and we don't want to take that much time. But if you can leave them some nuggets to take with them that will keep this thought going in their mind, at their businesses, at their companies. So I'm going to let, I guess, Steve start, if you want to give us some closing remarks.
The problems that we're dealing with took a long time coming. And it's naive to think that we're going to just be able to fix them overnight. William Faulkner said in 1951, the past is never dead. It's not even past. We have to be aware of things like that. And with cultural issues, if they develop culturally, you've got to change them culturally. And culturally takes time, devotion, but it has a benefit. And when you do that, eventually it will stick to the good for all of us.
Thank you, Steve. Amma?
Yeah, that was good. It's hard to follow that. I will say, when you hear us speaking, we've talked about two different things. One is education, and the other is the business enterprise. I will say to all of you leaders, I challenge you to know you still have the liberty to make a difference and change behaviors sustainably. And you do that by looking at, very similar to what Steve said, looking at these different initiatives as business strategy, and that it doesn't only impact you or me, but it impacts the business as a whole. So I will leave us with that. Thank you again for having me.
Thank you, Amma. That was great. And one last comment I'm going to read in closing from Nicole. And she says, values are not just what you say, they are what you do. If you're not doing it, it isn't the company value. So I think that's a great
way to close.
Great way to close. Thank you for that,
Drop
Nicole.
the mic, Nicole.
That's right. So, Steve, we want to thank you so very much for joining us today. We appreciate all of the information and nuggets you shared. Will you please come back and see us, because we can continue this and some other topics as well.
Oh, yes. I sure will.
We're going to take you up on that for sure. And Amma, of course, always a pleasure. Phenomenal job. I thank you both for joining me on the radical edge of HR and making my job so easy today. So, everybody, please, excuse me, follow us at HRKS LLC, all social media outlets, our website. If you have any HR needs, if you have any DICE needs, be sure you look us up. We'll be happy to assist you with whatever you need, because at HRKS, we know HR. Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.